marry me before sunrise?" Hannah Ashford held out a pouch of gold to an Apache stranger standing alone in the falling snow. She was supposed to run away with the man she loved. Instead, she discovered he had only been using her to get his hands on her family's money. So, with a broken heart and a future that would be decided by dawn, Hannah placed her life in the hands of a complete stranger. What she didn't know was that the man standing before her had spent the last 15 years waiting for the Ashford family to pay for the past. That night, Hannah believed she had escaped the greatest tragedy of her life. She had no idea the real tragedy was only beginning. The winter wind swept through the streets of Silver Creek, carrying snow across the wooden boardwalks and empty dirt roads. Hannah Ashford barely felt the cold. Her heart hurt far more than the freezing night ever could. She hurried down the deserted street, clutching a velvet pouch beneath her cloak. Inside were gold coins, family jewelry, and the last pieces of her inheritance that had not already been claimed by creditors. Just an hour earlier, she had believed those treasures would buy her freedom. Now they felt like proof of her foolishness. The image of James Whitmore refused to leave her mind. She had loved him for nearly 2 years, trusted him, believed every promise he had whispered beneath summer skies and moonlit evenings. Tonight, she had planned to leave everything behind and run away with him. Instead, she had arrived outside his cabin and heard the truth. "She actually thinks I'm going to marry her." The men inside had laughed. Hannah had frozen beside the window. "And the money," one of them asked. James laughed again. "The money comes with her once I get my hands on it. We're gone." More laughter, cruel laughter, the kind that stays with a person forever. Hannah had turned away before they could see her. She hadn't cried, not then. The betrayal had cut too deep for tears. Now she walked through the snow with nowhere left to go. If she returned home, her mother would force her into a marriage by sunrise, a marriage to a wealthy cattle baron old enough to be her father, a marriage meant to save the Ashford family from ruin. Love had never been part of the arrangement. The church clock rang somewhere in the distance, 3 times. Only a few hours remained before dawn. Hannah slowed when she noticed a lone figure standing beneath a gas lamp near the post office, tall, broad-shouldered, motionless. Snow gathered on the heavy buffalo fur coat, draped across his shoulders. The thick fur made him appear larger than any man she had ever seen. Long black hair rested against the collar of his coat. His face was strong and unreadable. Dark eyes watched the street with the quiet patience of a hunter. An Apache. Most people in Silver Creek avoided Apache men, especially at night, especially a Wilsway. But Hannah was no longer thinking like most people. She was desperate. Desperate people made dangerous decisions. She walked directly toward him. The stranger turned his gaze to her as she stopped a few feet away. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Snow drifted between them. Then Hannah reached beneath her cloak and pulled out the velvet pouch. The gold coins inside rattled softly. The stranger's eyes dropped briefly to the pouch before returning to her face. Hannah took a shaky breath. "I need a husband before sunrise." One dark eyebrow lifted. The wind whistled through the street. "You don't know my name," he said quietly. "No." "Then why would you ask me for the first time that night?" Her voice trembled. "Because everyone else has already given me a reason not to trust them." The stranger studied her for a long moment. Then, for the first time, something changed in his eyes. Not surprise, recognition. And that frightened Hannah far more than the cold. The stranger didn't answer immediately. Snow continued to fall between them. Settling on the shoulders of his buffalo fur coat, Hannah suddenly became aware of how absurd she must sound. She was standing in the middle of a snowstorm, offering marriage to a man she had never met. Perhaps he would laugh. Perhaps he would walk away. After all, Any sensible man would. Instead, the stranger studied her face with unsettling intensity, almost as if he already knew her. "What's your name?" he finally asked. "Hannah." His gaze never left hers. "Hannah what?" For a brief second she hesitated, then she answered, "Hannah Ashford." The moment the name left her lips, something flashed across his face. It vanished so quickly she almost thought she imagined it. But it was there. Recognition. The stranger looked away, toward the snow-covered street. Ashford. The name echoed through Mackay Grey Wolf's mind like a gunshot. For 15 years he had carried that name with him. For 15 years he had remembered the day his father died, the day everything changed, and now, standing beneath a gas lamp in the middle of a winter storm, fate had delivered Edward Ashford's daughter directly into his path. Mackay almost laughed. The irony was unbelievable. For years he had worked patiently, building businesses, buying land, acquiring debts, pulling invisible strings throughout the territory. No one knew how much influence he truly possessed, and no one knew that much of what had happened to the Ashford family had begun with him. The downfall of their fortune had not been an accident. It had been carefully planned. One step at a time, one loss at a time, a debt here, a failed investment there, all leading toward the same destination: ruin. Yet somehow the daughter of his enemy now stood before him, asking for help, asking for marriage. The snow swirled around them. Hannah shifted nervously. "If you don't want to, I'll understand." For the first time, Mackay noticed how frightened she looked. Not spoiled, not arrogant, not anything like the people he had imagined when he thought about the Ashford family. Just a young woman whose entire world had fallen apart. For a brief moment, doubt touched him. Then he remembered his father's grave, remembered 15 years of anger. The doubt disappeared. Perhaps this was justice. Perhaps this was fate. Perhaps this was exactly what he had been waiting for. Mackay reached for the velvet pouch. The gold inside meant nothing to him. But Hannah didn't know that. He closed his hand around it. Then he looked directly into her eyes. "I'll marry you." Hannah stared at him. For a moment, she seemed unable to breathe. Then relief flooded her face, the kind of relief only a desperate person could feel. She thought she had been saved. Mackay knew better, because as they turned toward the church at the end of the street, he carried a secret that could destroy everything. And before the sun rose over Silver Creek, Hannah Ashford would become the wife of the man who hated her family more than anyone else in the world. The sun had not yet risen when Hannah and Mackay arrived at Ashford Hall. The large Victorian house stood on a hill overlooking Silver Creek. Once, it had been one of the finest homes in the territory. Now it looked tired. Several windows were dark. The gardens were buried beneath snow. Even in the dim light before dawn, the place seemed to be holding its breath. Hannah tightened her grip on the marriage certificate tucked inside her coat. For the first time since leaving the church, doubt crept into her mind. Had she really just married a complete stranger before she could think any further? The front door swung open. Lady Beatrice Ashford stood in the doorway. Her mother was already dressed for the day, as if she had spent the entire night waiting. The moment her eyes landed on Hannah, relief flashed across her face. Then she noticed the man standing beside her. The relief disappeared. "What have you done?" she whispered. Hannah swallowed. "Mother." The sharp crack echoed through the cold morning air. Lady Beatrice's hand struck Hannah across the face. The force nearly made her stumble. Mackay's eyes narrowed instantly, but he remained silent. "You selfish girl," Lady Beatrice snapped. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Hannah touched her burning cheek. "I couldn't marry Harrington. You didn't have to love him." Her mother's voice trembled with anger. "You only had to save this family." Several servants had gathered inside the foyer. All of them stared. Hannah felt humiliation wash over her. But something inside her had changed during the night. For the first time in her life, she refused to lower her head. "No," she said quietly. Lady Beatrice blinked. "What?" "I said no." The older woman stared at her in disbelief. "I won't spend the rest of my life married to a man old enough to be my father." Her mother's face reddened. "And this is your solution?" Her gaze shifted toward Mackay. For the first time, she truly looked at him. At the buffalo fur coat, at his dark hair, at the Apache standing calmly beside her daughter. Disapproval instantly filled her expression. Hannah saw it immediately. The judgment, the prejudice, the same look many people in Silver Creek gave Apache families. Lady Beatrice's voice turned cold. "You married him." Mackay met her gaze without flinching. "Yes." The simple answer seemed to anger her even more. Hannah stepped forward. "He's my husband." The words felt strange leaving her mouth. Her husband, a man whose last name she had only learned an hour earlier. Mackay Grey Wolf. Silence filled the foyer. Then Lady Beatrice laughed bitterly. The sound held no humor. "We are drowning in debt. Your father is gone. Creditors are circling this house like wolves. And this is what you bring home." Hannah lifted her chin. For the first time in months, determination burned inside her. "No." She looked directly at her mother. "This is not the end of our family." Lady Beatrice shook her head. "You don't know what you're saying." "Maybe not." Hannah glanced briefly toward Mackay, before facing her mother again. "But I know one thing." She took a deep breath. "I will find a way to save this family." Neither woman noticed the faint expression that crossed Mackay's face. Because, standing inside the home of his greatest enemy, listening to Edward Ashford's daughter promise to save her family, he realized something unexpected. For the first time in 15 years, he almost hoped she could. The first few weeks of marriage were nothing like Hannah had imagined. Not that she had imagined much. After all, she had married a stranger who spent most of his days away from the house and most of his evenings sitting alone near the fireplace, saying very little. Mackay Grey Wolf was not an unwed man, but he was a distant one. Sometimes Hannah would catch him watching her from across a room, not in the way a husband watched his wife, more like a matron studying a puzzle he couldn't solve. At first, the silence between them felt awkward. Later, it became familiar. The real problem wasn't their marriage. It was money. Or rather, the lack of it. Every morning brought another bill, another creditor, another reminder that Ashford Hall was standing on the edge of collapse. One afternoon, Hannah sat alone in her father's study, surrounded by ledgers and unpaid invoices. The numbers made her head ache. The family owed money to ranchers, merchants, banks, and suppliers throughout the territory. Far more money than she had realized. She rubbed her temples and stared at the pages. "You're reading them backward." The deep voice startled her. She looked up to find Mackay standing in the doorway. His buffalo fur coat was draped over one shoulder. Snow still clung to his boots. "What?" "The accounts." He walked over and pointed to a column. "You're looking at expenses before income." Hannah frowned. "I know that." Mackay raised an eyebrow. "No, you don't." For a moment she wanted to argue. Then she realized he was right. Embarrassment warmed her cheeks. Mackay pulled out a chair and sat beside her. For the next hour, he quietly explained the books, patiently, clearly, without making her feel foolish. By the time they finished, Hannah understood more than she had learned in months. It was the first real conversation they had ever shared. And strangely, she enjoyed it. Days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months. Little by little, Hannah began noticing things about her husband. He always paid workers fairly. He remembered people's drives. He listened far more than he spoke. And despite what her mother believed, he seemed to understand business better than anyone in Silver Creek. Soon, unexpected opportunities began appearing. A supplier suddenly agreed to better terms. A freight company reduced its prices. A ranch owner signed a contract with Ashford Hall. At first, Hannah thought it was luck. Then she noticed something. Every opportunity seemed to appear shortly after Mackay returned from one of his trips into town. One evening, she finally asked him, "Have you been helping me?" Mackay looked up from his coffee. "What makes you think that?" "The timing." A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. The first smile she had ever seen from him. "Maybe you're better at business than you think." Hannah laughed softly, for reasons she couldn't explain. That smile stayed with her long after the conversation ended, as winter slowly gave way to spring. The atmosphere inside Ashford Hall began to change. The creditors stopped arriving every week. The servants no longer whispered about losing their jobs. Even Lady Beatrice seemed less anxious. For the first time since her father's death, hope returned to the house. And somewhere along the way, something else began to change as well. Mackay found himself looking forward to evenings spent with Hannah, listening to her stories, watching her laugh, watching her refuse to surrender even when everything seemed hopeless. She wasn't arrogant. She wasn't spoiled. She wasn't anything like the family he had spent 15 years hating. That realization troubled him more than he cared to admit, because every day it became harder to remember why he had married her. And every day it became harder to ignore the guilt growing inside him, a guilt built upon a secret Hannah still knew nothing about. By the time spring arrived in Silver Creek, Ashford Hall no longer felt like a house waiting to die. The snow had melted from the hills surrounding town. Wildflowers began appearing across the meadows. For the first time in over a year, laughter could occasionally be heard inside the old house. The change hadn't happened overnight. It had come one small victory at a time. A paid debt, a successful business agreement, a profitable cattle shipment. The Ashford family was still far from wealthy, but they were no longer drowning. Even Lady Beatrice seemed different, though she would never openly admit it. Her attitude toward Mackay had thawed. She no longer treated him like an unwelcome intruder. Sometimes Hannah even caught her mother asking for his opinion on business matters. To everyone's surprise, Mackay usually had the best answer. One evening, Hannah stood on the front porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. She heard footsteps behind her. Mackay. Without speaking, he stepped beside her and leaned against the railing. For a while they simply watched the horizon together. The silence between them no longer felt uncomfortable. It felt peaceful. "I never thanked you," Hannah said quietly. Mackay glanced at her. "For what?" "For staying." Something flickered across his face. "You paid me to?" Hannah laughed. "No, I paid you to marry me." For the first time, a genuine smile appeared on his face. The sight caught her completely off guard. It changed him, made him seem younger somehow, less guarded. For a moment, neither looked away. The air between them felt different, warmer. Then Hannah smiled back, and something shifted. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but enough for both of them to feel it. That night, Hannah realized she no longer thought of Mackay as a stranger. He had become the person she trusted most. The realization should have frightened her. Instead, it made her happy. A few weeks later, another surprise arrived. Hannah sat quietly in the doctor's office, her hands resting on her lap as she listened to the older man speak. When he finished, she could hardly believe it. A child. She was going to have a baby. The news left her speechless. By the time she returned home, her heart was racing. She found Mackay in the barn checking on a horse. When she told him, he froze. For a moment, he simply stared at her. Then a look crossed his face she had never seen before. Pure happiness, not restrained, not hidden. Real. He pulled her into his arms without saying a word. And for the first time since the night they met in the snow, Hannah felt completely safe. Neither of them noticed that fate was quietly preparing to uncover the secret that had brought them together in the first place. For a few short months, Hannah believed life had finally begun to make sense. Ashford Hall was recovering. The baby was healthy. And every morning she woke beside a man she'd touted completely. Looking back, she would later realize those were the happiest days of her life. Because happiness has a way of making people forget how fragile it can be. The discovery happened by accident. One rainy afternoon, Hannah was sorting through old documents in her father's study. She wanted to organize the remaining financial records before the baby arrived. Boxes filled with contracts, property deeds, and business correspondence covered the desk. Most of it was boring. Numbers, dates, signatures. Then she noticed a familiar name. Grey Wolf Trading Company. Hannah paused. Mackay owned Grey Wolf Trading. Curious. She pulled the document closer. The paper showed the purchase of a large debt, once owed by the Ashford family. She frowned. That alone wasn't unusual. Businesses bought debts all the time. But then she found another document, and another, and another. Every one of them carried the same name. Grey Wolf Trading Company. As the afternoon wore on, a knot formed in her stomach. The deeper she searched, the worse it became. Loans, property claims, land transfers, business contracts, again and again. The same name appeared. Mackay. By sunset, her hands were shaking. The final document nearly slipped from her fingers. It was a legal filing dated 3 years earlier. A filing that had triggered one of the largest financial losses her family had ever suffered. At the bottom was a signature. Mackay Grey Wolf. The room suddenly felt too small, too warm, too difficult to breathe in. No, the word barely escaped her lips. It couldn't be true. There had to be another explanation. There had to be. The front door opened downstairs. A few moments later, she heard familiar footsteps. Mackay. Hannah remained seated behind the desk. The documents spread around her like evidence in a courtroom. When Mackay entered the study, he immediately sensed something was wrong. His eyes dropped to the papers. The color drained from his face. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was unbearable. Finally, Hannah lifted one of the documents. "What is this?" Mackay didn't answer. "What is this?" she repeated. His jaw tightened. And in that instant, Hannah knew. He wasn't going to deny it. The realization hurt more than she expected. Tears filled her eyes. "You knew?" Mackay closed his eyes briefly. "Yes." The single word shattered something inside her. "You knew who I was the night we met?" "Yes." The tears finally fell. "Why?" Mackay stared at the floor. For the first time since she had met him, he looked defeated. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "Because I hated your father." Hannah felt as though the world had tilted beneath her feet. Mackay continued, "I believed he was responsible for my father's death." The room blurred. "I spent years destroying the Ashford fortune." Each word felt like another knife. "I bought the debts." He swallowed hard. "I pushed the businesses toward failure." Hannah's heart broke all over again. Not because she had been betrayed by another man, but because this time she had truly loved him. "I married you because I wanted your family to suffer." The confession hung in the air between them. Cold, brutal, unforgivable. Hannah slowly removed her wedding ring. Then she placed it on the desk. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing left to say. And as she walked out of the study, Mackay realized that 15 years of revenge had cost him the one thing he could never replace: Hana. The days after Hana left felt longer than the 15 years Mackay had spent chasing revenge. Ashford Hall became quiet. Too quiet. Hana refused to see him. Lady Beatrice refused to speak to him. And for the first time in years, Mackay found himself questioning everything he thought he knew. One evening, unable to bear the silence any longer, he returned to an old storage building outside town. It had once belonged to his father. Most of the records stored there had been untouched for years. Mackay spent hours searching through dust-covered boxes. Near midnight, he found something he had never seen before: a leather-bound journal, his father's journal. With trembling hands, he opened it. The final entries had been written only days before his death. As Mackay read, his heart began to pound. One name appeared again and again: Edward Ashford, Hana's father. But the words were not filled with hatred. They spoke of respect, friendship, trust. Mackay turned another page, then another. Finally, he found the entry written on the day his father died. The truth hit him like a bullet. Edward Ashford had not caused his father's death. In fact, he had tried to save him. The real culprit had been a corrupt land agent who had manipulated both families for profit before disappearing years later. Mackay stared at the page in disbelief. Everything he had built his life upon was a lie. Every sleepless night, every plan for revenge, every loss he had inflicted on the Ashfords, all of it had been based on a mistake. A terrible mistake. He closed the journal and lowered his head. For a long moment, he sat alone in the darkness. Then another realization struck him. The greatest damage had not been done to the Ashford family. It had been done to Anna, the woman who had trusted him, loved him, carried his child, and whom he had betrayed. Outside, thunder rolled across the distant mountains. Mackay stared into the storm. For the first time in his life, revenge no longer mattered. Only Hana did, and he feared he had already lost her forever. A week later, winter returned to Silver Creek. Snow pounded against the windows of Ashford Hall as Hana went into labor. The storm was the worst the town had seen all season. Inside the house, the doctor and midwife worked through the night, while Lady Beatrice waited anxiously outside the bedroom. Miles away, Mackay sat alone in a small cabin near the foothills. He had stayed away ever since Hana left him. He believed she deserved peace, a life free from his mistakes. Then, just after midnight, a rider arrived through the storm. "The baby's coming," the man said. Mackay was on his horse before the sentence was finished. The journey through the snow took nearly an hour. By the time he reached Ashford Hall, every light in the house was burning. He stepped onto the porch but stopped at the front door. For a long moment, he couldn't breathe. Fear held him there. Not fear of danger. Fear that Hana would refuse to see him. Fear that he deserved it. Then the front door opened. Lady Beatrice stood there. For several seconds neither spoke. Finally, she stepped aside. "She's asking for you." Mackay's heart nearly stopped. Moments later, he entered the bedroom. Hana looked exhausted but beautiful. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. Their son. For a moment, Mackay could only stare. Hana looked down at the baby before holding him out. Slowly, Mackay took his son into his arms. The child opened his eyes, and something inside Mackay broke. Tears filled his eyes for the first time in many years. Hana watched him quietly. Then she spoke. "We can't change what happened." Mackay lowered his head. "No. But our son deserves better than the past." For the first time since the truth had come out, she reached for his hand. Mackay held it tightly. Outside, snow continued to fall across Silver Creek. just as it had on the night they first met. But this time, a new day was waiting beyond the storm. The end.